Private judging is more, I think, akin to the regular old kind of court-based process, but it's similar to mediation in that it's an opportunity to streamline the case a little bit and to have, some undivided attention from your bench officer. So what it is, it's just like, taking the public court system and privatizing it. That's what it is. You just, find who you want your private judge to be, and that could be a retired, bench officer of some kind, or just a highly regarded, practitioner that is willing to serve in that capacity. And then that person actually is appointed directly by the superior court. So you send a stipulation and order appointing the private judge to the superior court, so the superior court will sign off on that. And then you have your private judge set up. So again, all the same rules apply. It's the same situation as if a public county judge were hearing the case, but it's just someone in private practice that's doing it instead. But all the same rules apply. Ordinarily, with your private judge, you're going to get into what we call case management early, which means we're going to talk about a roadmap for, all of the discovery stuff that may need to be done, if depositions need to be taken, if documents need to be produced, if there are like business valuations or any kind of other, kind of third-party professional input that is needed. All that stuff will get talked about at the very beginning with the attorneys. Typically, there are attorneys involved when you have a private judge. It's not very, in fact, I've never heard of two self-represented litigants hiring a private judge. I suppose it could happen, but ordinarily you're going to have representation on both sides. But early on in the case, you're going to sit down with the private judge. We're going to go through the roadmap of what the case is going to look like, with the eye toward really minimizing the unnecessary parts, but you can just kind of excise from your process, right? So it's much more streamlined. And then you're going to set up, if you need any hearings, you're going to set the hearings up. And again, you don't have to wait on the superior court judge. Typically, if you file a motion in court, it's going to be 6 to 8 to 10 weeks before you even get to make your argument, right? So you got to wait for an awfully long time. But with a private judge, you just make sure everybody's on the calendar, and you can have that heard pretty quickly if you need that. And a lot of private judges will actually step into the role of like a judicial settlement conference officer, so they can help parties talk through issues with the hope that the parties can find some route to resolution. It's not a true mediation setup, but even in public court, you have a mandatory settlement conference that you have to go to right before trial, and it's either a sitting bench officer or a pro tem bench officer that is going to help work through the issues before you decide that you can't settle and you have to go to trial. So a private judge can do that just as well. So again, it's another mechanism within the system to allow for quicker resolution. This can sometimes come down to the issues that are before the court, and particularly for like seriously complex businesses, like you've got 50 million or more in gross receipts, and maybe it's a family business, but the other spouse has been working in the business for the duration of the marriage, or even if it's a business that's acquired during the marriage, but only one spouse is operating it. So cash flow is kind of weird, and maybe there's just a ton of moving pieces. There's a lot of very specific law that applies to that situation. And not every county and not every judge has experience with those kinds of issues. And so, not to say that those judges can't, make a good determination. It's just, you're probably going to need a lot of experts speaking to those issues to make sure the court understands exactly, what's going on. So if you have a private judge that's familiar with those kinds of issues already, because maybe they've litigated it a million times, or if they're one of those bench officers that, maybe sat in LA or San Francisco or San Diego or some of our bigger counties where those are very common issues, maybe that familiarity is already kind of baked in. Right. So you have an opportunity to find somebody that's got the credentialing to really understand without doing too much extra work. The other reason you may want to do it is just for confidentiality reasons, right? Because these proceedings are not happening in open court. They are happening in a conference room somewhere, whether that's going to be at, the private judge's office or one of the attorney's offices, or like a conference room in a hotel or something. The public is not going to be there. So if you've got sensitive issues that need to be talked about in a much more private forum, that's a good way to do it. Now, a caveat to that is that any marital settlement agreement that's going to get attached to a judgment, so say you come to agreements or the private judge makes orders, that's going to go to the Superior Court for filing, and that's going to be part of the public file. There are things that you can do, though, you can do this with a public bench officer as well, but certainly with a private judge, you're going to want to talk about the opportunity to keep that marital settlement agreement out of the public portion of the file if that's important. So there are steps to do, to go through to do that. But again, that's another thing that very commonly comes up in the private judging realm.